throwing up in my mouth all day, every day until then, I guess. So I was thinking about this group in this presentation, and I was thinking about how I always, my work is always better. My understanding of myself and my process and my practice is always better after I talk things through with you guys. So that's one of the functions this group has served just for me personally, is to have like a safe space to work through my partially formed, sometimes collapsing ideas, and kind of find the thread. And then also I was thinking about like, well, it's not just a place for each of us to work out our own ideas, but when we all choose to show up for each other as we can, obviously, then I guess we all get something out of it in this really, because it becomes this really supportive, safe, non-competitive, non-hierarchical space still, which is what I remember Jonathan saying that he really wanted, was a non-hierarchical space where ideas could flourish and be challenged. And I think so. I don't know. I'm waxing rhapsodic rather than presenting to you. How's that? Right. Here we go. Let me share screen, and I will share. Okay. You don't need to see my Zoom workspace, I don't think. Can you see this? Yes. Right. So this is my transfer paper. The title of my project, you may remember, is about collecting rape in the V&A Museum, and the title of my transfer is Parasexts, because I thought that was funny, naming sexual violence in the frame. So it sort of, to me, it has this idea of like, just the title has this idea of like sexting. So sort of sending innuendo kind of in this secret way. And I kind of think that the museum is sexting us. So that's kind of how I got there. So I'm gonna Sally, your face. I can't. Okay, so I'm gonna read. You're muted.
Shall I switch my camera off?
No,
For
don't.
distracting
Don't
you.
switch your camera off. I need your face. Okay, so anyway, I have a 15-minute sort of thing I'm going to talk about. So, and then I will take you kind of through the paper itself a little bit, and answer any questions. And am happy to, if you have any challenges, Patrick especially, but anything, if you have any, if you're like it doesn't work like that, please. That's why I'm here. Okay, right. So Gerard Genet's paratexts, Thresholds of Interpretation, Exhibit A, is where I start. He is interested in all of the things that surround a work. So when I first walked into the museum, I had this very clear idea that I was looking at something that depicted sexual violence in something like, for instance, the rape of Proserpina or the rape of Europa. Um, but I realized that it took me a while to see that, and I wanted to know, does anybody else see that? Hi, Natasha. And thanks for coming. And does anybody else see that? And if not, why is it hard to see? So first I had to understand, how do we see and understand and experience the museum? So what I've sort of written up here to kind of share with you guys is the framework that holds the paper. The theoretical text lies inside of that. So I'm not actually going into my theoretical text about sexual violence in the museum. I'm talking to you guys tonight about kind of the framework that sits inside of, if that makes sense.
Could
So
I
yeah,
could I ask one question?
please.
Um, just because it caught me when I saw the title.
Yes.
Do you know about Sextus? And is there any reference to Sextus here? And now I'm talking about Sextus Quintus,
I
who
don't know
is
anything about.
the who is now, what was he? I think he's the son of the last. I think he's probably mythical.
Yeah.
Son of the last Roman emperor. Is that or something like that? Anyway, he features in Leibniz's work because Leibniz, in a dream that Sextus has, he wanders around a palace with a god, I forget which god, in
Mm-hmm.
which he sees all possible worlds. And in the best possible world, he rapes Lucretia and it's viewed as the best possible world
Wow.
because it's the one that has it's the best for everybody else. Even it's not
I'm
great
sure
for
Lucretia
Lucretia.
doesn't think so.
No, but he's trying to explain that God does not decide on the basis decides how God decides and how bad things can happen. And he's trying to explain the idea of there being an infinite possible number of possible worlds, and this world in which in Sextus rapes Lucretius is in fact the best possible world, and Sextus realizes that in the dream and accepts his fate. But you mentioned sex, almost say Sextus, and I wondered if it was a reference to this
I have never heard
mythological
that, and
story.
I'm so grateful. I mean, you just like chapter 10, sexist, sextus. Is that where we get sexist?
I don't
Anyway,
know.
maybe
I
not.
don't know.
Um,
I don't know the answer
yeah,
to that.
thank you for that. I will absolutely go galloping right down that rabbit hole immediately. And there's all kinds
Amazing.
of work coming from that already. Like I'm just like, I gotta go. I need to paint. I'm sorry. That's awesome. Thank you. How freaking disturbing. Okay. Right. So let me go back and I'll begin this sort of text again now that I've introduced it 2 or 3 times. So Girard Genet's paratexts, the thresholds of interpretation is where I start. So he is interested in everything that surrounds the work. So the bits that we often overlook, but that completely shape how we encounter it. So titles, prefaces, introductions, cover designs, catalogs, wall labels, all of that is known as paratext. And then I look further at the paratext of the museum. So sight lines, automatic flow of traffic, architecture. So a paratext is a frame, and there's a frame within a frame within a frame within a frame within a frame until you get to the outside of the museum, and even the steps leading up to it are part of the frame. Are we together? Okay, good. All right. So for Jeanette, these things form the threshold to the work. They frame our entry, they set expectations, and they quietly teach us how to read or look. So there's no such thing as a neutral frame. Every paratext directs meaning before we ever reach the object itself. So my own idea, what I call paratext ethics, builds from Jeanette, but it shifts the emphasis from description over to responsibility. If every frame shapes understanding, then whoever makes these frames has ethical obligations. Curators, editors, designers, all of them are deciding what kind of access we, the viewer or the museum goer, have to meaning. So paratext ethics then is about holding these thresholds accountable. It means naming things clearly, avoiding euphemism, disclosing standpoint, and being honest about power. The aim isn't at all, by the way, neutrality. I'm not looking to universalize or to cleanse. I'm looking for ethical transparency, which usually causes more trouble, not less, right? The trouble is the fact that there's no trouble. So I want ethical transparency. So every label, caption, or framing device carries moral weight, and it can either launder harm into taste, which I'll go into in a moment, or it can expose the structure that produced the object in the first place and name it. So when I bring this idea into museum work, the paratext becomes spatial, as I just said. So wall text, lighting, display sequences. So for instance, some of the objects that I'm looking at, sort of one sits on either side of a grand doorway. And so that says something. It's not off in the corner. It's like, da, 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 you have reached hall number 52, you know. So these aren't explanatory or just explanatory. They're moral architectures. They tell us how to feel inside the space and who is entitled to speak to some extent. My intervention asks what happens if those architectures are made visible. So if the museum's own framing devices are treated as materials to work with, covering a label, refusing a euphemism, or writing some counter-paratexts, interacting with the objects themselves, or with the object of the museum, that tell the truth about violence are ways of making the institution's neutrality, quote unquote, visible as a choice. So that bias to neutrality exposed, and also sort of the hopeless collapse, the fact that there is no perfect museum, there is no one museum, all museums are different, just like all people are different, and there is no way to make them perfect or correct. So what we really want to do is expose the mechanism as much as possible. right? Radical transparency or that kind of idea. So in order to sort of produce the theoretical writing that kind of props up these concepts as far as a philosophical standpoint goes, because I live in this like empirical contemporary reality situation, and I think, like I went into the museum and I made a change to their label, which I will show you. My daughter Sadie and I went in, we did some guerrilla art, which was really fun, kind of like vandalism, but all we used was blue tack. We didn't hurt anything. So just to be really clear, it wasn't really vandalism. This is recorded. Guerrilla art is what it was. So that's a physical action in a contemporary space in response to what I believe the museum is doing with the choices that it's making in showing sexual violence. And then this is sort of the philosophical standpoint that says, here's why what's happening is problematic. I don't know if I needed to say anyway. So Roland Barthes' mythology is a key reference kind of for this framework. Is everybody familiar with the mythologies? Claire, have you taken a look at it at all? So this is it's this when Jonathan talks about the sign and the signifier, or the signifier and the signified. Barthes talks a lot about this semiotics, which is the language of symbols, and Barthes speaks specifically. And Patrick, I'm so glad you're here, because also you're the most terrifying person for me to talk about this in front of. So like, it's good practice. Because I loved Bart. This is an aside because there's only like 5 of us and I'm so grateful. I loved Bart's from when I was in like high school, because I got the Lover's Discourse and it made me edgy. That was my introduction to Bart's. Like I didn't engage deeply with the actual like philosophical underpinnings until I started working on this paper. So I am still a baby in PhD land. Okay, so Roland Barthes' mythologies is the next key reference. So about mythologies. In the 1950s, he looked at everyday French culture, advertising, wrestling, and magazines. And the wrestling piece is awesome. And we can talk about that more if you guys want to. And showed how ideology hides in plain sight. So for him, a myth for him isn't a lie. It's a way of speaking that turns history into nature. And by that, what Barthes means is that myths take things that are actually historically specific, like a certain social norm or a cultural value, say such as the idea that women belong in the home rather than, you can fill in your favorite end of that phrase in the museum, as painters. And so it makes those cultural social norms or values seem like they're just naturally the way things have always been. That's what a myth does for him. It's like turning a historical choice, and we know that recorded history is chosen, it's curated by many hands and special interests, into something that feels like a fact of nature. So culture takes social choices and presents them as obvious truths. And this is what museums do with aesthetics. They convert power into beauty and call it a universal or natural truth. A sculpture of mythic rape becomes an artwork about form, not about violence. So by that, I mean, when you look at, say, for instance, the rape of Proserpina, right when you go into the V&A. So here it is. It's like the second object that you encounter when you go in the South Kensington entrance. You can see her kind of sitting on, you can see her kind of sitting on his shoulder, and she's being swirled around. So you have the classical gesture, and you have the flowing drapery, and you have sort of the beauty of form. And she has like a slightly knitted brow, but her mouth is really plump and sort of open. And so it has like words that would describe it, which are words that are on the wall text, say things like lyrical, beautiful garden sculpture, instead of saying things like, this is a depiction of sexual violence. It is called the rape of Proserpina. Do you see the difference there? Okay. So this is about culture taking social choices and presenting them as obvious truths. Blah, blah, blah. So I've used, for example, the example before about how so a sculpture of a mythic rake becomes an artwork about form, not about violence. So the institutions, from the person who commissioned the work to the artist fulfilling that desire, to the path the object then takes, say, like, for instance, the Rape of Europa, where it's designed for by Titian. It's designed for private enjoyment in King Philip's bedroom and then ends up in a public national gallery as high art. And it goes through all these hands along the way, which change and obscure the meaning. To the curators who select it and the museum's trustees who purchase it, each of these actions smooths over the object, obscuring its meaning, changing its meaning, while keeping its problem present, often in the title, until admiration of something called the Rape of Proserpina feels like common sense. So when I talk about laundering power through beauty, this is exactly what I think Barthes means. Ideology passing as innocence. It's a second order of signification, perhaps. We can talk more, like I said, about Barthes' mythologies, etc. afterward. And now that we have Patrick here, he can talk about it instead of me. From there, I bring in, so just to sort of collide things here, from there, after I set up the paratexts and the significations, I bring in Foucault's panopticon, Bordeaux's distinction, and Jauss's reception aesthetics. So together they explain how this system disciplines both seeing and feeling. So Foucault's idea of the panopticon, I don't know if you guys, I'll just go over it quickly. It comes from Jeremy Bentham's design for a circular prison. So this building where one central guard tower can see all the cells, where the prisoners can't see the guard. So because they never know when they're being watched in this theory, they begin to watch themselves. Foucault uses this metaphor for how modern institutions, schools, hospitals, and museums produce obedient subjects through invisible surveillance, which becomes self-surveillance. So power no longer needs force, it works through internalization. In the museum, that means that we police our own reactions. We lower our voices, we admire correctly, and we don't question the framing, the paratext, because we trust the institution. So Bordeaux extends that logic into the social field. In distinction, he shows what we call taste, and the V&A is a museum of taste. I have a big section about the origins of the V&A Museum, but it was sort of put forward originally as a museum that was an educational institution designed to teach blue-collar workers basically how to have good taste and how to produce some of these important effects. So Bordeaux writes this wonderful thing. You guys have probably all heard of it in distinction. So he says that taste is not innate. It's learned behavior that marks class and belonging. So taste becomes this currency of power. The ability to recognize what counts as good art or refined behavior separates insiders from outsiders. It's another form of surveillance, but it's social rather than architectural. So I have it sort of down as the museum as a secret prison through the architecture of taste, the social architecture. We learn to monitor ourselves according to cultural capital. And then behind this dynamic sits what I call the powerarchy, the broader structure that keeps all of these systems aligned. It's not limited to gender, but the patriarchy remains both its product and its first and sharpest tool. The powerarchy organizes power through admiration, discipline, and belonging, and it uses patriarchy as the original template for who is entitled to speak, to act, and to be seen. In the museum, this plays out through taste and beauty, the soft machinery of legitimacy that teaches us which bodies, histories, and emotions count as cultured. It is the engine that links Foucault's surveillance, Bordeaux's distinction, and the institution's unspoken demand for compliance. And then, so Jauss adds this ethical counterweight. He writes this thing called reception aesthetics that argues that meaning isn't fixed in the objects or decreed by the institution. It's made in the encounter between the work and its audience, which we talk about quite a lot in this group. So that's reception aesthetics. So how is something received and what kind of a relationship does it create? Every viewer arrives with a horizon of expectations shaped by culture and time, and interpretation happens in that space of meeting. So unlike Foucault's and Bourdieu's more deterministic systems, Jauss opens this crack, the possibility that reception can be an ethical act and that awareness can shift the frame rather than simply obey it. So Foucault gives me the architecture, the invisible surveillance that teaches self-control. Bourdieu gives me the social mechanism. The taste is a hierarchy that decides who belongs, or we decide on our own and self-sabotage. And Jauss gives me this ethical opening, meaning as a live exchange between the work and the view, meaning as a live exchange between the work and the viewer. So the museum doesn't show art, it produces subjects as well. It teaches us how to admire correctly, how to perform understanding, and how to internalize legitimacy. And that's where paratext ethics returns as a form of counter practice. So once you know the frame is ideological, you have to choose how to act within it. Jeanette shows that thresholds construct meaning. Foucault and Bourdieu show that those thresholds also construct people, and Jauss invites us to treat that encounter as an ethical space. So paratext ethics becomes this method of reauthoring those thresholds, rewriting the institutional script so that access itself becomes a moral question. Oh my gosh, that's why I wrote it down. Okay, so that's like the framework that I wanted to share with you, because there are other things also. So let's see, what did I write? As a side note, my wider paper goes into my actual topic of the socialization of violence against women, and the museum is a strong mediator of that social problem. It goes much further into the political scaffolding behind this. It treats the museum as a kind of a crime scene, a place where violence, extraction, and ideology are cleaned up and displayed as culture. That part engages Agamben's state of exception, Butler's idea of grievability, Mbambe's necropolitics, Fricker's epistemic injustice, and Spivak's question of whether the subaltern can speak when institutions speak for her. I'm not going into those today. They form the deeper architecture, but they underpin everything that I've been talking about here. Okay, so here is, I'll show you I did 5 forensic visits to the museum, and you can see this is probably really tiny on your screen. I don't know if I can make it any bigger. Oh, I can. So here, can you see that all right? Here, this is the rape of Proserpina and a person at the V&A looking at it. And this rose card that's on here is my guerrilla art. So I wrote a new wall text, and I brought it in, I stuck it next to the other one. And I want to say, by the way, that I'm not saying we shouldn't show these works in museums. I love museums. It's my opening paragraph talks about how much I love museums. I'm saying that I think we need to think about how we're showing and what we're showing and what those things teach. So here is one of the things, and this isn't actually necessarily a new idea. Like, actually, I found out that the city of Manchester did a textual intervention in which they further contextualize their objects by making a trail through their collection that had some new text, and it was only up for a while, but it's happening in some places. So this is what I wrote. I used this sort of dusty pink color, which is like the faded kind of scarf of passion, that all of the women that are being abducted are waving, oh, or like the pooties are flying overhead with, oh, don't you love it? I'm Eros, pachoo. And so it's always put in this lovely little container, right? So a putti, this would be a second order signification. A putti means that whatever's happening in the scene, in the paratext, the putti is part of the paratext. It frames it and says, through a second order of signification, the fact that I'm here and she's waving this red scarf of passion means it's love and she's excited about it. It tells you not to read it as violence, even though the title is the rape of whoever. And there's always abduction, etc. So I wrote in this sculpture shows Pluto, king of the underworld, seizing Proserpina by force. Miss recasts this abduction as love and marriage. In truth, it is sexual violence. Her body twists in resistance as she's carried away. And then I took some of the museum's own texts, commissioned in 16th century Florence for Giovanni Vittorio Soderini, a garden designer. The work was first installed in a villa fountain. where Proserpina's rape became a decoration. In 1594, it was sold to Antonio Salviati, who placed it in another palace garden, embedding violence within elite leisure. And if you think about just that sentence for just a second, you can think about sexual violence in elite leisure, and you can think about the Lolita Express going off to paradise, and you can think about all sorts of other things like that, how elite leisure extracts sexual, especially and specifically, along with a lot of other things, extracts sexual availability as power, as currency. For centuries, institutions have praised the sculpture's dynamism and realism while muting its subject. So the other text said it was a garden sculpture and that it's a wonderful, it has dynamism and realism, but it fails to bring in what its subject is. So I'm revealing that it's been muted is an important part of the writing on the text. Allegory and ornament have laundered brutality into beauty, training viewers to admire the form over the harm. To look at this object clearly is to confront how museums aestheticize sexual assault as culture. Okay, so yeah, I will sort of wrap it there. I can, so you can see there, here's the, I said I was going to wrap it there. I'll just show you guys this. There she is looking. I mean, almost immediately, Sadie and I went in, we stuck them up, and almost immediately people were engaged in reading them. And they spent a lot more time at the sculptures than they had before, which was interesting. Yeah. The paper is long. It goes into other, it sort of looks at these thresholds, and then I talk about a recipe for change, and I go through kind of my work and how it has been building to addressing this, and how these intersections sort of what they have to do with the museum itself. But I will stop there, and I will let you guys ask me any questions or tell me what you think.
But if the museum said nothing, is it complicit?
Wait, say that again, Patrick. Sorry.
If there was nothing, if the museum says nothing, is it complicit in just showing the work? Is that what you're saying?
I think that attempting to remove paratext is, and I think that's what the white cube is trying to be. Not like the metaphorical white cube, devoid of context. But the white cube, of course, is not devoid of context. It itself becomes a signifier of privilege. And so I think that the museum itself, its body, one of the things I can show you, like how can the museum not speak, is maybe the opposite of Spivak's question, can the subaltern speak? So here's something really interesting about the museum itself. If I can find it without scrolling too fast, hold on. Can I do it this way? No, of course not. Okay, okay. So when we go into the museum, okay, so the first thing that happens is here is the museum thinking that it's not speaking. So when you first go into, the first threshold is the unmediated digital query into their search our collections. And if you type the word rape into the museum's search bar, what comes up is 262 objects on this unmediated form. So this is the museum not speaking, but in not speaking, it says a lot. It says that this word doesn't hold any special significance that needs any sort of context or trigger warning or care, which is present in almost every other kind of institution, and especially in educational institutions, which the museum is positing that it is. It puts itself forward as an educational museum. So it actually speaks more loudly when it chooses not to speak, I think. And I don't know that it's possible for it to speak without the context of it being a museum. And I'll show you why I think that is. And that is because of this. So here's the front of it. And it is this massive, and here's the sovereign, and here is her muse, Albert. And then there's these broad sweeping stairs, and then there are these two stones. And the stones say, this stone was laid by Her Majesty Queen Victoria, Empress of India, on the 17th day of May, 1899, in the 67th year of her reign, for the completion of the South Kensington Museum, inaugurated by His Royal Highness, blah, blah, blah. But the problem is up at the top, Empress of India. So the museum isn't speaking about that either. So there's no context outside for this. There's no wall text explaining what this means and why Empress of India is written there. And I think it compounds, because what it does is it ends up telling a story of the museum. So you walk by this stone and you're agreeing to enter a museum of taste that's curated by this known admitted colonialist, and that the museum takes a colonialist stance if it doesn't mention the fact that this harm is on the outside of the building, I think. What do you think?
Well, I had a couple of things. I mean, which I guess goes back to what you brought up when you bought the collection. First of all, I mean, it's not a matter of whether they're showing it or not. Just holding it in the collection is enough to have a meaning or significant meaning, one way or the other, whatever it be. And now you bring up another point, but this is a very difficult point. There was an exhibit. I was just listening to someone the other day. There was an exhibition in the ICA, I think, maybe around 2019, by one of these artists whose medium is law, and they had mortgaged indefinitely all the mahogany from the ICA's building. The ICA doesn't own that building initially, but they'd managed to get a contract where all the mahogany in the building had been leased indefinitely to them. Oh, sorry, mortgaged indefinitely to them, so it was no longer owned by the ICA or whoever owned the building. And the reason they'd done that is because all that mahogany came during the colonial time. In fact, the whole exhibition just revealed, as it's quite obvious, how indigenous to everything in British culture this is. And so when you point to that sign, I could find you a million other ones, not just in the museum. It's embedded in the whole of British life. And it is a reason why the government will never accept or retribute anything to do with colonialism, because it's where all the wealth of this country came from. There's no chance that they would ever admit to this, and the museum being paid by the government is complicit in that. But the whole of British culture, all of Britain is complicit in that from the monarchy upwards. So it's so ingrained that I see zero hope. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's in your face every day, but you don't even notice it.
And
It's so ingrained in British culture. And actually, that artist, an American artist, and also leased some land that was promised to the slaves that was never given to them, and leased it indefinitely so no one could ever build on it somewhere in the south of. But I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm not approaching reparations, because I think reparations are absolutely, I mean, obviously everybody thinks reparations are due, and reparations are also impossible, because reparations can never erase the harm and the pain of losing, for instance, all of the access to your ancestors. You know, we have a writer here from the Bahamas, Ash. She's an incredible writer, and she can't, like millions of people cannot trace her lineage back more than 3 generations, or four or 5 generations, because she ends up in the slave records really quickly, or very late in her family's life. And then she can't, trace her roots back. And so I think what you said, though, is, so that's, I'm not interested in the politics of how that happens. What I'm interested in is changing the fact that it's around you all day. It's endemic in British life. It's endemic in American life as well, because we were a colony who continued to colonize. So we're like that, second or third order victim that then becomes a perpetrator. And so what I'm interested in is peeling back the paratext that says this is normal. This is normal. These are not the droids you're looking for. You can go about your business. I want to lower the shade and be like, hey, as long as we're all looking at this, we should talk and think about what we're looking at. What is its context? Because I don't think any change can be made until visibility happens. And visibility happens only when something terrible happens and we have some sort of groundswell of like Me Too or Black Lives Matter or trans rights. And those happen in cultural moments and get knocked off the pedestal by whatever is exciting and spectacle filled next. And I think if we approach education and educational museums and places that say that are perpetrating this as a reality, as an embedded truth, and we ask them to change that behavior just to provide more context, that's visibility that withstands the fluctuations of the insanity, I suppose, because the museum moves at a slower pace and the school children, walk through it and are indoctrinated into the fact that this violence is beauty. You see massive school groups going through and looking at these pieces and reading the word rape and looking at each other and asking questions and going, huh, and walking on. I mean, that's how it happens. Oh, Claire, you're muted.
Just by you highlighting it and doing your PhD on this, it brings people to light, and awareness of of these of the wording, and which can be changed very easily. I mean, it's only a label. It's not. Maybe the stone thing would be a right mess, but
I
and
don't
yeah,
think we should change
still.
the stone because that's how we forget things when we occlude and erase our history. I'm not calling for an erasure. I'm calling for a revelation. I want the records out there that say we found this here and we took it. Here it is.
So
Sorry.
you actually would like to have the original one always there,
Yeah.
and then have this new how it should be written. Yeah, I don't see. I think that's a great idea.
Because then we can't forget. We can see what we're capable of when we're not thinking
Mm.
beyond our
Mm.
own need and greed in the moment. I think one of the ways that empires, and not just this empire, Patrick, but like empires, the only reason that the V&A is being targeted is because I'm here. If I was in Paris, it would be the Louvre. It's the same problem. Um, so I think, yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead. What were you saying, Claire?
Well, I mean, like you're highlighting the idea of rape, but then I was thinking about other violence um, that are in statues. Like, say, for instance, everyone knows the Christ on the cross, and there's a little red mark that he's been stabbed in the side, and he's bleeding, and no one takes it to, they just you become blasé about it. But then I don't think there would actually be a label to explain anything there. So I'm thinking
But
that.
why not if we're here? I mean, just to sort of tease it out, like, why not? Because London is an incredibly multicultural city. Not everybody is Christian that's here. Not everybody knows what the rituals of Christianity are. The V&A is full of all kinds of religious artifacts. In some, like the Wheel of Dharma, is explained what it is and how it came to be. And you're right, when you look at images often of Christ on the cross, because I see a lot of them, it says, this is Christ on the cross, but it
And no
doesn't for me.
explanation.
Yeah. So I
What's
mean,
really
and
interesting
also
to
like,
me,
go ahead.
so I was thinking, I think what's really interesting around this is this whole idea of myth
Mm.
as well, because um, particularly, in educational contexts and as children, we're told the thing, not even the sort of the Bart's mythological sort of concept, but even, all of these are stories, religion, Greek myth, all of it. It's all storytelling. And I'm not sure that's set out and separated like that. We're taught it as if it's true, the same way as Barthes talks about, the signifiers and the signs that are in those stories, that they're a way of indoctrinating us to believe reality, if I'm understanding it correctly. And I think it goes the same way as Patrick's saying, it goes back to the kind of root of our society. I think it goes across. What you're dealing with is something so huge, actually, because this whole storytelling, if you look at it all like that and you say, take away people's individual beliefs, but the religions, Greek mythology, Roman, etc., indigenous stories, they're all a form of
Of myth.
storytelling to help
And this
us.
is what Barth talks about this also. I mean, so just to sort of clarify, like myth, ancient story versus Barth's myths. So there's sort of two layers. So when Barth says something is myth or becomes mythological, my understanding is that it takes on the myth, it becoming a myth is equal to it becoming the lie. But that's also how what you're saying, how these ancient stories begin. Like you explain one thing through another and it becomes mythological as an ancient and embedded as some form of truth or explanation. And Barth is kind of saying that, so you take, for instance, a rose in a flower pot at a garden center. And in that flower pot is a sticker that has a picture of a rose on it. And what that sign is telling you is that the thing itself behind the little sticker, the rose, is this. This is a rose. And you can tell because there's a picture of the rose. So the picture is the sign that clarifies the thing itself, the signified itself. And then if you get the second order of signification, where you cut that rose off and it's red and you wrap it in paper and you hand it to somebody, it's no longer just a flower. It means something. It means love. And when the rose accrues another sign, which is that it means love, it skips over I am a flower and it goes to this means love. Then you have a second order of signification, and that second order is the thing that mythologizes it. Rose equals love, in the same way that red scarf of passion equals desire. And it skips over is actually desired or is being told to desire or whatever. So um does that.
The problem with all of this is it's all very simple. This structuralism view of the world, right? I mean, if I take, for example, Degas, no, the name's got the black paintings by the Spanish painter.
Velasquez.
No, the one with the firing squad. The famous picture with the firing squad.
Yeah.
Manet.
No.
Renoir. No.
Spanish. From the 1730s or something. I've got his name. 1790, I think. Anyway, we don't.
Yes.
I don't know why the name's. Anyway, if we take his paintings,
yes.
Particularly his late ones, the black paintings or the ones that came after that he painted in Marseille, they are absolutely gruesome. They are of the worst atrocities people ever commit. They're a reaction to really the Napoleonic Wars and the first invention of total war. There are scenes, some of them are mythological, and no one really knows why he painted them or what they're meant to represent. There was no text that went with them, and they're still completely ununderstood, really, and debated. But what and you can note that he's exactly at the time of Kant, when the Enlightenment was coming and the myth was being argued, a man was overcoming this, and the new Enlightenment view of the world would do away with mythology and we would have a better world. And he's problematizing all of that. And he's saying, no, the world isn't like that. People are evil sometimes. And if you give them their complete freedom, they will do horrible things. And he's trying to say it's not as simple as you want to make out. And if you do away with myth, you're going to do away with actually the way people really are. It's all, you're making such a rosy world. And it problematizes the whole thing. And what I would say is, no one really understands what these pictures are actually saying, and that is actually what they're all about. They're actually too complex to understand.
Yeah,
And it's that I'm trying to say. By Bart is really telling us exactly what everything means, but he's pretty much picking very simple,
yes,
like toys and stuff like that, right? Common
yes.
day things.
So
He's not really dealing with the real world. I mean, the horrendous real world. He's not dealing with what's going on in Palestine or something.
no, but I
He's
would
not dealing with that. And I'm just saying the real world, and it's, in the collections of museums as well, is much more complicated than that. And I'm not sure you can write a card that explains. I'm
no,
not
I
sure
don't.
you should write that card, because you're going to prevent people having their own opinion about what this work is about. So that's all I was. When I say he problematized it in the sense that we have no idea really what is going on now. It's too complex. And art historians are yet to resolve what is actually the meaning of these works.
I totally understand that, and I have a couple of comments. And the first one is that I think that you're right. Like, just writing a card, you cannot write. My point is that you can't write anything that explores and explodes everything. However, they do write some things, and they put what they write as neutral. They say this is neutral, and it's not. And so I would also argue that the world of the museum is not the real world. The world of the museum, especially a museum that says I am a teaching education, I'm a teaching institution, is a pedagogical framework, and it's stating that it is such. And when we teach, we simplify. And so if it says I am a teacher, I will give you something that is straightforward and simple, hence whatever wall text is on there, then it opens itself up to this kind of critique. And so I would put forward to you one of the thresholds that I look at as I go through my paper is right when you go through the big gift shop, there's Zephyr and Flora on the left-hand side of this doorway, and on the right-hand side is Apollo flaying Marsyas. So on the left-hand side, you have a story from Ovid, which talks about a nymph, and we can just stop at that word and say nymph is this word which comes to mean nymphomaniac, or sexually available or sexually insatiable, and also meant young woman wild in the flowers, and so comes to mean nymphomaniac, just to be clear. So there's already within that this language that was used then, whether or not the art is embedded with it or not, the language that the story uses and then the language that the museum repeats means certain things. So there's this nymph Chloris. The gentle west wind, Zephyr, falls in love with her, the gentlest of all the winds. He pursues her. She runs away. He catches her. She declines. He rapes her because his brother had given him right of rape. And scholars talk about whether they actually mean rape, but I'm going to frame it in he chases her, she says no, he catches her and impregnates her. So I'm going to go ahead and call that rape today, based on what's happening today. And because we're showing it today. And so then he makes her, because of her beauty, and as a gift to her, he makes her the queen of the springtime. And their love is celebrated by the world bursting into bloom as a reminder of their union. This is the story. So the sculpture that you see is the gentle, pudgy 1750s body of this like foppish west wind going like that. And then Flora kind of floating up behind him going and looking down at him. And they're all draped in flowers, and it's very rococo and all this stuff, and it's great. And so, but the image itself has no relation at all to the narrative of the story. It takes that story and it says someone pursuing someone, catching them and impregnating them, and then saying, okay, I'll marry you and give you my title, looks like softness, gentleness, beauty. because that's what we're presented with, even though it refers to the story of Flora and Zephyr. So that's the second thing. And then I would say so I'm not saying that we should put wall texts up that say this artwork is about this and you should feel this way, because that is antithetical to art. I would rather there was nothing, but there's no way to have nothing, especially inside this educational institution. So what I want is this conversation. I want to shake us awake to say, okay, so that's on one side of the door. On the other side of the door is Apollo flaying Marsyas alive. So Marsyas is a satyr who challenges the god Apollo to a song contest. And he's dead before he even loses this contest, right? No worries, Spiker. So he's dead before he even loses this contest. And so he challenges Apollo, and Apollo flays him alive for his hubris in saying, look, I should have the chance to challenge you. I'm that good. And the sculpture is him peeling his skin off. Okay, so the wall text for Flora and Zephyr says this beautiful garden sculpture was at the Duke's house, and then it was in this other garden, and now it's here, and isn't that lovely? And the sculpture where Apollo is flaying Marsyas has wall text that says, this is one of the most disturbing things that can be depicted in art today. And intriguingly, we do not know why such a disturbing subject was chosen. So there's the curatorial voice. It's like, it's leaky because museums don't completely overwrite or review all of their context all the time. It's patchwork, like the tax code. It's like updated in glitches. And so I'm really advocating for transparency of these things and discussion around them. If you're going to say Apollo flaying Marsyas is disturbing, then we might need to say the story of Zephyr and Chlora can be read as very disturbing sexual assault.
So Patrick, what were you when you were saying about, it was Goya, wasn't it? Goya's Disasters of War painting.
Yeah.
So when you think referencing those and saying that, I mean, we know with those series of paintings that they aren't understood, but following that on, are you saying that we can't interpret pieces of work,
I'm
historical
saying these
work?
works, and some later ones he did in Marseille.
So just him, but just generally.
Well, I pick him because his work is quite bleak, and it's he also, if you like, he also depicts rape, but many other things, and many really gruesome things as well. I mean, he certainly in some of his series he depicts the most gruesome things that humans do.
I'm not saying
but the thing I'm really saying is we don't have any idea what they're about, really. We don't even know what the title was of some of them. I'm just saying, do we need a card? Can we have a card other than this is done by Goya at this time? I mean, we don't know what it is, right? So if we force a card on it, then it's more. I mean, I'm saying exactly that. Do we need to write a card? I mean, should we write a card given we don't?
I don't know.
I guess
I mean, for example, he is depicting some of these myths, right? I mean, these myths you're talking about, but no one. But the image is far too complicated. The myth is there, but the way he's presented it in such a strange way, we can't understand what the myth is. Why is the myth there? It's not simple as it's just a myth. I was thinking as you said this, well, do we go back to blame the painter for painting the myth?
No.
But is it that simple? Did he just paint the myth? Is it black and white? Is there another reason? Are there like 15 different things that I know it's not painting, but is there another? No, is the painter actually trying to tell us something else, right? In the case of those paintings, he clearly is, and it's much more complicated. And he's never saying it's good, bad, or what he's saying is he's not saying it's good. What he's saying is has a very complex message we haven't really understood. It's far more complicated than just saying, oh, he's got that myth, and then let's tell him what that myth's about. That would undermine the painting. That's what I'm trying to say.
I guess the thing with Goya's particularly that some of Goya's paintings, the subject or object was gruesome and portrayed in that style, and therefore you're reading it as gruesome. I guess some of the things that Kate's talking about are this sort of subjects and objects that are, whether they're myth or otherwise, are should be gruesome and but depicted as beauty.
Okay, let me put it another way. He's also doing stuff for the, I think he was the court. He's also doing things for the king. He was the lead, and they look on one level like they're compliant with what the king asked him to paint, but they're quite ambiguous, and they have quite a lot of other meanings which are far away from what you might otherwise deduce, and some of them are myths. I'm just saying that by placing other things in the image, we can undermine the myths completely and give it a completely different meaning. So all I'm saying is art isn't as simple as, oh, here's the myth. We're not reading children's books here. We're not presenting a nursery rhyme. Even that is complicated.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that simple. It's not just here's a card.
And so, Patrick,
in a way, Bart's book is a bit like that. Here's a children's toy, and then blah blah blah. But this is much more complex than that.
yes, which is why Bart's is only one framework that I'm using to talk about and clarify the paratextual that includes the framing of the museum itself. It sets the stage, and then I look at other things like necropolitics and the state of exception and Spivak's subaltern and those kinds of things to talk about the problem of the image itself. And it's really clear to me from what you're saying and the impassioned way that you're saying it, that it sounds like I'm saying we should whack a label on everything. And that is not what I'm saying.
I'm not saying that. I'm just problematizing the problem.
Yeah,
right? It's not as simple as.
And I'm not saying it's simple. I'm not saying we should explain what the myth is. I'm saying that today, if we use the language of sexual violence, we have an ethical responsibility to admit and show that we're using that language. And I also think that there are other things that we are showing and obscuring at the same time. And so I'm really interested in how we're shaping the sociological narrative. So basically, my project goes into the question of what happens when you take something like, let's say, The Rape of Europa. Okay, Titian's wonderful painting that we all love. Okay, first of all, let me state, I'm a lover of museums, I'm a lover of Titian, and I love this painting. Okay, so let me just put that there. And then you take this painting, and it is called The Rape of Europa, and she's on the bull's back being taken across the water with her dress falling off of her. So it's clear that rape is part of this fantasy and part of this image. Whether that's the meaning of the myth or not, or the whole meaning or not, is not what I'm talking about. So you take that sort of situation, and then you say to a school group that comes through, or to whoever that comes through, this is a beautiful painting painted during this time by this person for this king. Okay, and it's called this thing, and look at the composition, and Titian was a direct painter, and the bull's head is too small, and isn't that funny? And like, notice that the eye is looking knowingly at the viewer, and that there's the girls on the beach, all the things that you say about the painting that you read in all the art history books. But those things that you read about the painting that you see in the art history books are teaching something sociologically to the contemporary people that are walking through the educational space of the museum. And what I'm saying is that one of the things that those hidden messages that are being taught are women should understand that they are to be docile and not have a facial expression when they're being abducted, and that being pursued means you are desired, and that being desired means being pursued, and that if you are pursued, you have done woman correctly, so you should be grateful for that kind of attention. And that when we see the statue of Apollo in Marsyas, we see Marsyas's mouth open in a grimace. He is emoting, so he has a heroic death. He's allowed to protest, and we see the violence even though it's still aestheticized and it's named. And so certain kinds of violence are permitted and other kinds are not within this powerarchical, patriarchal structure that feeds objects of taste into the museum. And so it perpetuates these sociological understandings about gender norms and sexual availability and safety, along with many, 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 many other things. I'm only focusing on that particular bit.
Because yeah, I guess the question that we're circling or that we're talking is it's also this idea of, do institutions have a responsibility to provide context for people who can't? So let's assume that 50% of the people who go through our public museums have not studied any art. So they go through and they look at, they look. I mean, it might be the first time they've heard about a particular artist. It might be the first time they've come across a sculpture. It might be the first time, or certainly they haven't studied. So they have no context of the myth. They might never have come across the Greek mythological stories. That's not unusual for people to go through the English education system and not have been exposed to Greek mythology, any degree of art history, and yet if these people are entering these institutions, is there a responsibility for the institution to provide context for that work, and what does that context look like? So,
Well, and within that, I would go back to what Patrick was saying about Goya's pieces, and that is that we didn't talk about what context they are shown in. So the museum adds, and each particular museum adds its own flavor of paratext. So like the torture museum in Bruges says, we're about torture, we're showing torture, we show it in a way that's really problematic and spectacularizes it, but it doesn't really say that. So it's every museum sort of packages itself. Part of its marketing materials is its paratext, which helps explain the positionality of the curatorial decisions and the collection decisions within. So where are Goya's pieces being seen? Are we talking about viewing them only the image out of context on the screen? Are we talking about viewing them in his studio? Or are we talking about viewing them in an educational institution or in the wild where they live currently? And if they're just hanging on the wall in somebody's house, maybe they're not given any context. And again,
I think the majority of them are in Madrid, in whatever the big Madrid museum is, forgotten that, Prado.
Prado, yeah. And so I would be curious what the Prado's own, like what kinds of information it puts on the wall. It's mostly that, see, I hate wall text. When we hang shows here at Rupture, we don't put anything up about anything. It drives people crazy. They're like, why don't you say anything about the work? And I'm like, because that's your job, or go do some research and find the artist, have conversation. But so I'm not, hurrah, let's explain everything. I do not think that it's good, but I also know that the institutions hold a positionality which is already speaking. And then the objects land within that positionality, within that framework, the paratextual element of the building itself, and is freighted with a history of everybody that's touched it as it's gone through there. And it holds part of that as the lesson that it teaches. I mean, the museum, we know, is always happening, right? Time is recursive inside a museum. So if that's true, then it's speaking in its native language to a contemporary audience. And what is it saying? That's really the question that I have in my thesis. And anything that we do will not clarify what it's saying. All it will do is sort of shift the lens. And what I want to do is kind of clap and say, can you see all the different ways this is being framed for you? Here's the frame. So for Zephyr and Flora, part of the framing is the commission who said to the artist, can you please make me a lovely statue in this Rococo style that you're so good at, and make it virtuoso carving. And so it's got this beautiful bas-relief and all this stuff. And just, oh, let's do Zephyr and Flora. We'll put it in our Follies garden. Bravo. Do you know what I mean? Or whatever they did. And so like, I mean, that's part of the framing. The person that commissioned it buried it the first time. And then the artist executing the commission gets to display his prowess, and maybe he loves the story, maybe he doesn't love the story, but we don't know that because his voice is previously silenced by the, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, it's making me think that that the label turns into an artifact itself, like the signage should also go in the museum.
Totally.
And then
we should have like a book of labels as we
yeah. Where do we, yeah. Um, that was my thought when you were talking about the labels. Like, but surely that label is an artifact. And I was also thinking about this, the word myth, which seems like a myth in itself, and the acceptance of the word myth is part of this code of conduct, unofficial code of conduct, that it's a myth, so it's okay. Like the question of, is it reality? Is it a myth? Does it matter? So you
Well,
put myth on it, it's okay?
I
Or
think I think that relates to this. This goes back to that Descartes, that comment I was making earlier, that um, when the Enlightenment comes along, and I think this is what the museum ended up espousing, we're overcoming myth. Myth is these things are like relics that are no longer have any. Sorry, their meaning is somehow they're like stories that kind of don't matter in a sense, right? They're more about their we're so we've gone beyond that is what they're espousing, right? In this enlightenment world, we used to
gone
live in myths.
beyond
We've
the
gone
word myth?
beyond that. Yeah, we've gone beyond the world of myths. Now the human is in control, and Kant would argue, we're better than that. We're human. We have our self morality. We can overcome everything. And what I'm saying about that exact art that is coming in Spain at that time is he he disputes that this is ever true and that this enlightenment is completely false. If you let humans have complete freedom, they do diabolical things. It's not. It's an unreality that they are espousing, and he's not saying they always do that. He's just saying the world is much more problematic than that, and so he just creates a bunch of really problematic works that are very difficult to interpret because it's just
And I
saying
think
that
he's
that
he's
is
right.
the world.
I think Goya, I would agree with that. You know what I mean? If there's one thing that this research has done, it was take me directly to the place that you went when we started the conversation, Patrick, which was like, well, this is just awful and impossible. Do you know what I mean? Like it was probably the most depressing. And I was like, and it's so obvious and it's so simple and it's really horrible. And it's just us teaching ourselves to continue to be shitty to each other. And I don't want to erase it because that's how we forget. And also, I value this art. I was raised on this art. I love this art. And I wonder to myself, like, is that the same as like wanting to love Michael Jackson's work now that I feel so betrayed by Michael Jackson? Like, how, are we squaring with this cancel culture today and all this kind of thing, And like, I'm, but I think that the museum is, especially a museum like the V&A, which is a museum of museums, it's a collection of collections. It talks about the act and the art of collecting itself and how that, museums started in wealthy people's homes, right? Originally, it was just people would collect stuff in their homes and then people would come over and the homes would be open certain days, or you could make an appointment, or you could get to, like, including Buckingham Palace still has a very nice collection in its home and you can go see it. And so it's that collection, before we had Instagram to just put everything up on the internet and be like, these are the things that I like and value, is sort of like the cultural way of saying, like, this is who I am and how you can tell how to identify me as far as my class goes. And there's this Bourdieu's theory that everybody wants to be socially mobile, that this is like one of our, I think it's like he thinks he's right there with Maslow, being like, our hierarchy of needs include being socially mobile, like way down as an order of safety. And that this sort of makes this churn toward capitalism and this churn for social mobility so that we can be seen as ascending rather than descending. And so taking a trip to the V&A to learn to see these things is to learn to what to like and how to like it. And so that's pedagogical. And so I'm just saying, like, basically I'm just yelling, question everything. Oh, poor Natasha, I'm losing everyone. All right. Well, anyway, we're way over too. It's we're 15 minutes over.
Sorry, I have
Thank you,
another
Natasha. No,
Zoom.
no, zoom on, baby. Thank you for coming. It was lovely to see you.
Bye.
Appreciate your input. Okay, bye. Yeah, anyway, I don't mean to keep you, Sally. I know you're knackered too.
No,
And
no, it's really, and it's interesting. I mean, it's really interesting to hear more detail about what you're doing because I've been aware of it on the periphery, but I'm really enjoying the debate, because it like everything comes back round again, but Patrick bringing in
It's wonderful.
all these elements. And I was just thinking about Goya being a post-humanist back in the in that era.
It's quite revolutionary, actually.
Yeah, and I've been funny looking at those disasters of war paintings and recently, and you sort of when you have these conversations and something suddenly just comes together and you go, oh, it's a fascinating secular debate and it's because it's all linked, isn't it? But
yeah.
There's quite a lot of, you were talking about collectors. There's quite a lot in there. I think it's in the Arcade's product about the collector.
Yes,
there's a
that's
whole
one of the
chapter on
things.
that.
I have it right. Where do I have it? Oh, it's up at my other house. But yeah, Benjamin, I mean, his absolutely there's so much about that, about how we begin. Yeah, it's a really good text for this. Because it's such a simple problem, but it's baked into every aspect of our life. It's a super complex. It's not an easy problem. It's like simple but difficult. And so I think one of my issues sort of defending it or talking about, like, I want to defend it, but I also want to be open to understanding how to approach it better. Like, I don't really want to just argue. But I want to argue until and maybe like ask you to understand my point by like a brief overview is not really very polite. But like what you returned with is exciting to me, because I feel like the more we talk about it, the clearer the problem that I'm trying to talk about becomes. How do you feel?
Well, I mean, immediately when you brought it up, I felt a little bit, I mean, I don't have a great deal of sympathy for museums, but I kind of wondered if you should really be starting with the library somehow, because the library there's no cards in the library, and you search that database and you'll find anything you want, with no, but it's somehow the library, because it's a text and you're going to read the text. Is that somehow fine?
Self-revealing. I don't know, because the library,
because the text is just as difficult to understand as the image.
And if you look at like the libraries in Florida right now, they are missing certain books. So the voice of the library is its own paratextual, and like who built and who funded that library, who pulled that collection together, then who pruned that collection, who says what's in circulation and what's not in circulation and why. And all that paratext is missing. So there's a whole group of children that are going to grow up in Florida that will never read 1984 or Margaret Atwood.
No, I mean, the other thing that I thought was interesting is, I'm not sure if it's true now, but I don't come from London. I come from, somewhere where there is a small art gallery, but there's no art gallery. My youth was not spent. The equivalent of going to the museum was actually going to the library. I mean, from an educational point of view, that's where I was taken. I wasn't taken to the museum. I mean, I didn't go to the museum until I came to London, which was a long time after I was 18. So
it would be fascinating to look at the library. I think it's
I'm not quite sure it's where people are going. That's what I'm trying to say, because not everyone has. Yeah. Very few people have a museum, or a museum that has much to say on
this museum
on these issues.
The V&A specifically, the one that I'm focusing on, has increased its footfall by massive amounts and increased its collection to 2.8 million objects. And now anybody can go to the storehouse and call up an object to touch and interact.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing about the V&A. I've done that. I remember I've forgotten the artist now, a photographer. We got 2 boxes out. You can borrow them, but it's a mess, where none of it is. What you get is 2 boxes, and you rumble through them. They've never been documented or anything.
I went and got.
They're not able to actually go through everything they own.
No, they're not. They're not. They have no idea. Yeah. And on the other hand, they have set up, this is something, at the storehouse, I think it is an Anselm Kiefer exhibit meets Raider of the Lost Ark. It's like the Disneyfication of the museum storehouse event. Do you know what I mean? Like, and you can pretend to be a researcher and people don't know if you're a researcher or not, and everything's glass. So they're leaning over the stairs, taking pictures of you, putting your gloves on while you unfold this tapestry, and it's all hush hush. But everything is observable and everything is performed, including the objects performing. So it's like the museum, but again, you know what I mean? It's like a whole, and so then it wraps itself in this further paratext that like we're serious and we're interested in investigating and in research and exposing what we have, and you can be part of that too. But like what is already being said by the items with anyway, yeah. So
also, isn't it for me as well? Isn't there also the going back to this idea of libraries and text is that visual is whether it's through your phone or whether you go to a museum or wherever you get it is more subliminal, is it not? Whereas if you have to actually read something, there has to be a level of understanding as you read it, otherwise it doesn't have any impact. Whereas you can look at something and not understand it, but can have a subliminal impact on you.
That's really interesting, Sally.
Well, there's this gap between, what could be disable and the image for it, which is a big gap actually, right? It's not clear that your text could even begin to bridge that gap. No matter how much you write.
Yeah, but also to engage with the text, you've got to be able to understand or get anything from the text. You have to engage.
You mean a book?
Yeah, sorry, a book. Yeah,
text-based
in a book or the library, you have to. You don't just look, glance at something and have it doesn't have an impact on you. You've got to actually read and engage with it.
Yeah.
Whereas when you walk into a museum, you could walk through the whole thing. Whether it's a museum or whether it's any other form of visual,
walk by a fountain,
yeah, or look at go through some art images on your phone or wherever it is. But that's going to subliminally, that message, well, for me, seems to be more direct and quicker and passive. It's totally passive.
Well, this is why in 600 AD, the Pope, what was his name, decided to teach Catholicism through imagery, through iconography, and rather to bypass literacy, because they could make the stories smaller and easier to understand, and then they could arrive with their moral intact, because visual storytelling can load all of that paratext into it.
That's what branding's all about. You see the brand and you want it. You don't you don't research it. You don't research Nike to see if they are actually the best trainers. You just know the brands, you buy them. It's I don't know. It just seems to me again that there's a sort of
there's a hidden
activity to it all,
sociological element that operates in the background. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm not saying, by the way, Patrick, that my text, the wall text or whatever, it's just one idea. I mean, another thing that I did was I occluded the text. I went in and I put some of my template paper and I just covered the label. So instead it had a wrinkled piece of paper over it, just to try that out. Because I don't think any text can translate the gap. What I want to do is expose the frame.
Well, I mean, when I was thinking about what you were saying, I was thinking the text isn't really what's important here. What is actually more important is, if we're talking about education, what you were taught before you even arrive at the space. I mean, or are we talking about just a random person? Or it sounds, when you were describing this, as if it's a straw group of children you're worried about. Well,
I'm worried about everybody.
I don't think. Yeah, I know. But I'm just thinking if this education that you're effectively espousing to what you're going to see, if it really should be on the wall, shouldn't it be somewhere else? Shouldn't they actually give us a book when we walk through the door? I mean,
or an audio guide or something,
or something much more I don't know, what's the word,
rigorous?
Maybe rigorous is the wrong word. Much more open to the I don't think people read the text. Somehow, right? I mean,
that's why I was so shocked that the person was standing reading the text, because they don't, so like I was like, oh, this caught somebody's attention. That's interesting.
I don't come to a work and go, oh, well, let me look on the wall and then I'll find what it's about. That isn't the place you'll find it.
No, but many people that don't have an art education. So if I have one of the things that I talk about to demonstrate my understanding of Bordeaux is I had a ski client that I used to travel around with, and we would go to museums together before we would meet the rest of the group. And we went into the, I don't remember where we were, honestly. I think it was probably I think it was the Rijksmuseum, actually. So his name is Richard. And he ran past like hundreds of works to take me to the Vermeer and say, look, 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 I want you to see that this is here. And I was like, well, that's great. But would we not have seen it had we like enjoyed our way in? And he's like, well, I don't need to look at all that other stuff. I just want to see this. And I was like, have you seen it before? He said, yes. I said, have you seen anything else in this museum before? He said, no. I said, why do you want to see this? And show me that you know that it's here. And he said, because my friend Katrine is a docent and at the Pompidou, and she showed this to me, and she told me this is the most important painting in this museum. And I said, well, what if we go and look at other museums, like not other museums, other images in the museum? And he literally freaked out. We walked away from the Vermeer and I was like, pick one, but don't look at the wall text. Don't look for a name that you recognize. Pick something that you're attracted to, that you like. And he said, I don't know what I'm supposed to like. So he was unmoored and terrified, too afraid to approach art on the wall, afraid that he would like wrongly. And I think that this is an extreme example of the condition that most people kind of live with without, like, as Sally said, like it's sort of baked in as this subliminal learning how to like. And that's like the aesthetic panopticon working inside of Richard right there.
Yeah, I mean, art education is still incredibly exclusive. You can go all the way through the education system and not really come across any, unless you choose the art route, and so many people are put off it early on. You can go all the way through without learning anything about any real, history of art. I completely bypass it. So you have, and increasingly they're taking creativity out of even the early years and the middle years education. So this, I mean, it's, the thing is, this starts, as Patrick said, way before the museum, and it's a massive social issue because we have these works of art available to the public with no context. And never having come across it, and people are terrified about it, or they just make assumptions, because they don't read up on it, or they don't see, the vast majority of people do not go and see something and then go home and read up on that artist.
But that is the problem. I mean, yeah. then a lot of the problem of justifying why things are there is that it's somehow high art. I mean, high in the sense that it's higher than me, in the sense I'm uncouth or something. I don't know anything about art. Of course, it's right because somebody more cleverer than me put it there, or whatever. I mean, that's the way the museum is usually operated, or in the eyes of the mass, right? So
yeah, it puts itself forward as the voice of authority and like a parent, like the father, and we say, okay, we trust you, teach us.
So no one, it's never been down to earth. It's never been down to earth, and but I don't think the V&A can be down to earth. The building is the wrong building.
Yes,
it's just the wrong place. It's just not never going to happen.
You can't be on set. That's why I like when you see the facade and the outside, like those stairs are a tread that's like 2.5 inches high. They're deep and they're low. And the reason is so that women in gowns will walk at a proper, so that to slow men down so that they can walk with women in gowns so women won't step on their gowns. So you're meant to dress a certain way when you enter this building. Those stairs are actually built for that purpose. So, I mean,
it's very difficult to take such a place and kind of make it familiar for people, right?
Yes,
and it's just never going to happen.
No.
Really, it's very
difficult. Not saying that we need to change it. That's not the point of the discussion. The point of the discussion is to say, look at all the voices that are speaking all at once. What are they saying? And are we aware? That's the point.
Well, I mean, it would be great if the people could go in there and say, and start complaining, hey, that's in the wrong place. Why is that there? I don't like it. But we're not, when we're a million years from that. Because no one feels they have a voice in the museum.
I'd love to stand in there and just say, why is there so much art about sexual violence? And this is just out, to see art about sexual violence.
But wouldn't it be interesting as a response to do exactly that and to invite people to stand in with a laser pointer and be like, I don't think we can show this one, this one.
But Kate, that is exactly what is needed to make it really be worthwhile, right? Because it needs to be not on the wall. It needs to be a place where people actually feel they can talk, and that's really what is missing, right? You can't. I met Jonathan the other day, and he was talking about. It just reminded me of when we were just talking. He was talking about a performance he once did. So they used to have a show at the RA for people who'd gone to the Slade and the Royal College. They used to have a show. This was in the 70s, but none of the other art college got to be invited to this show. And they viewed it. Jonathan and a bunch of other people viewed it as, very snobbish and it shouldn't be allowed. And so, like 50 of them ran into the RA with bags of rubbish and just started chanting very loudly in the building about I can't remember why I can't remember exactly what they said. He told me what said, and they just walked through the place and just chanted very loudly and left all their rubbish on the floor and then left. And they stopped the show after that. They stopped doing it anymore.
Wow.
But that kind of is not something you do, right, in a museum. It's not something you feel you have the right to go and say, well, it's not right. This the way it is.
Well, and that's why
they don't even promote such a dialogue.
No. And that's why sticking a label on the plinth, which added something, felt like such a transgression. And even more so covering the label with my crinkly paper. I have a picture of that too. And it was, and we came back 3 hours later and it was still there because like they don't look that closely at their own stuff. There's too many objects, like you said. So like you could actually, the wall text could be completely changed by a bunch of folks and they could like not know for years.
I wonder whether you could do some sort of tour through it though, where you
I hope to do an audio tour.
do an alternative. We'll even take groups of people around because you always get groups of day trippers or whatever, don't you, being led by a tour guide who's explaining stuff and they're not necessarily related to the museum or the gallery or what have you. And I wonder whether you could do some sort of almost performance piece where you go around and talk about the work in a completely different way, as we just said, highlighting all of this and challenging it all in a very vocal way that anybody who might be passing may hear or
a complete gibberish way to add, like if it's going to be a performance, you know what I mean, like to expose the occlusion by you know what I mean, like it's a anyway. I think there's many ways to do it. I think that there are educational pathways that open up the conversation specifically, and then I think that there's also artistic responses that build on the problem and expose it or compound it. But I think I had thought, that having like a QR code outside the museum, like on a little sandwich board that you can put on your phone and be like alternative audio tour by artist me, and like get on, put it in and do like a self-guided tour. Like you're now entering medieval Renaissance Europe. You'll notice, like, because if the museum's going to give it context, then I could give it context, or I don't know.
Fascinating.
It's fun, but it's devastating. It's fun and devastating at the same time. But anyway, thank you guys for taking the time to talk through it with me. Patrick, I really appreciate your challenges and revelations. It's helpful. Shall we?
Yeah, maybe we should call it a day.
Call it a night? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, you guys. Yeah, if you think of anything else, Patrick, and you're like, hey, they should know this, like feel free to send me your fury. It helps. Okay. All right, good night, you guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.